to the study session for December 27th, 2023, 6 p.m. Council Chambers, 111 East Maple Avenue. We called this one to kind of give an update and a discussion on the purchase of the Geehaw building, the pros, the cons, all of that. If I could just take a moment and I just want to thank everybody for being here on a short notice. I know it was short notice, so thank you for being here. If I can just take a moment of personal privilege just for one simple thing. It is the 70th wedding anniversary of Don and Barbara Potts today. And so the only reason I know that is the family was kind enough to call me and say, could you provide a proclamation? So we did, and I just want you to keep them in your thoughts and prayers as they celebrate this day and for their health and good being. So with that, Mr. City Manager, please proceed with your prepared presentation.
Okay, well, good evening, Mr. Mayor and members of the council. As the mayor said, I am Zach Walker, and I'm honored to be the city manager for Independence. As the mayor indicated, we're here tonight to review the proposed financing plan to complete the acquisition of the property that we all commonly refer to as the Geehaw building. I'd like to begin, much like the mayor did, by thanking the mayor and council for making the time to be here for this meeting tonight on short notice, and certainly during a busy time of the year for everyone. I'd also be remiss if I didn't thank our staff who helped pull this presentation together on short notice and over the holiday weekend. So thank you for the hours you put in on that. And I'd also like to thank the many people who have sent very thoughtful questions about this project our way. I've done my best to try to aggregate all of these questions and to answer those tonight. So we will work our way through that. I do want to say that all of the information in here has been developed based on the publicly available information that's attached on the council agenda on the city website. And the presentation is really intended to help break that information down into some more digestible bits for folks. So tonight I thought I would give a summary of Bill 23121. That's the ordinance that will be considered at your January 2nd meeting, which is next Tuesday evening. We're going to talk a little bit about how this plan came together and then answer the questions on the various buildings that are related to the plan. But before I go any further, I do want to make sure that we're all operating, the collective we, from some same basic premises. For us as staff, there are two major issues underpinning this conversation. And the first and the most important motivation behind this proposal are the men and women of the Independence Police Department. Right now, they work in what might be referred to as a dump. It is, in my opinion, disgraceful to our community's image, and it's a liability for anyone who enters. Ideas have been discussed for years about how to address this deficiency, but that has not resulted in any meaningful change. And it is long past time to act, and that is what we mean to do. That leads us into the second issue. This transaction is really intended to be the first domino to tip in what I expect to be significant improvements in the betterment of our community over the next several years. As I conveyed in the presentation on the general obligation bond back on November 13th, the city is considering putting an issue before the community in April of 2025, which is just 15 short months away. A major consideration for that proposal is the redevelopment of our city. And in order for this Geehaw proposal to make sense, you have to take a macro level view of the community and its needs. This isn't just about where the utility employees work, and it isn't just about solving the police facility needs. This is about revitalization of an entire community. There's a great deal of connectivity between these plans and the moving parts. So as staff, we've identified a building in our city that allows for a one-stop shopping for most municipal needs outside of public safety. It creates a justice center campus with space and growth opportunities for our police department needs. It allows our local government to run more efficiently and effectively for all of our citizens and stakeholders we serve. And it also frees up prime real estate in the heart of our community to become an economic engine for generations to come. Now, Bill number 23121, the terms of that, it authorizes a 20-year lease purchase of the Geehaw landmark building located in southeastern Independence. The lease purchase, as I mentioned, will be voted on next Tuesday at the January 2nd meeting. This deal, under the terms that we have negotiated, must be finalized. The financing must be completed by January 17th, or the city would forfeit its deposit that was put down as part of the negotiation on this project. Now, we've discussed this concept in various levels of detail dating back to at least September. There was a joint City Council Chamber of Commerce meeting that was publicly posted and noticed and could have been attended and was attended by some members of our public. And at that meeting, I shared our desire to relocate city employees who currently work at the IUC to a repurposed building. And I use that term repurposed. It was intentionally vague since we were still in contract negotiations. And as we all know, when the city becomes a known and involved party in a real estate transaction, prices can get pretty out of control pretty quickly. But on November 13th, I shared with the council in this study session that the city was exploring acquisition of the GEHA building. And on December 8th, we posted the council agenda that contained the first reading of this item, and December 18th, we had the first reading. That means that 50 days will have passed since we first shared this idea publicly and when the council will vote on this ordinance. And because of that, I would say any suggestions that this has lacked transparency is just not accurate. I'm not sure how many days need to elapse before transparency has happened, but 50 days seems like quite a few. I hope that would alleviate any concern that, somehow my staff has tried to sneak this in during the Christmas holiday. We've been talking about this since before Thanksgiving. Now, all that said, what I really want to convey here is that this transaction has been carefully and thoughtfully contemplated, and we've methodically worked to develop the terms and secure a safe outcome for the city. I recognize, though, that not everyone has had as much time as the council and staff to digest this information, so I do hope this meeting will provide some additional answers about the questions we've received. The issues with our police facilities, particularly police headquarters, remain unresolved. Independence has long supported its police department, and I know Chief Dustman and his team don't take that for granted. The community has supported the public safety sales tax to address a multitude of equipment needs in the department. They have approved Proposition P to provide funding for 30 more police officers. They authorized an amendment to Proposition P that allowed us to increase salaries for the police to among the highest in the region. The council has also done its part as well, having recently approved funding for body cameras and other technology upgrades, as well as authorizing funding to hire a dedicated attorney for the police department. You may recall the council also approved funding to send a delegation of our police department to Washington, D.C. to honor their fallen comrade, Officer Blaise Madrid Evans, at the National Fallen Officers Memorial Ceremony. But one persistent problem that we've been unable to solve is the condition of our 50-year-old police building and the disjointed alignment of the police personnel working in subpar facilities throughout the community. And as we've failed to address this issue, the problem has only gotten worse and more expensive. Attempts to fix or repair the building have been unsuccessful. There have been costly efforts to fix what cannot be fixed, such as the ongoing leaks in the roof and sleeves placed on sewer pipes in an effort to stop the leakage of raw sewage throughout the building. The building remains unsafe and unsanitary. As an example, just this year, one of our detention officers who was at work serving our community had their vehicle stolen from the back lot of the police headquarters, as that lot is not secured. Moreover, the number of police personnel and civilian employees has grown to meet the increased population in the community, but the facility has not grown with it. Every facility assessment that we have had has concluded that a new building is needed and not financially prudent to remodel the current facility. As Chief Dustman asked rhetorically earlier this year, would you want to work in this building? Recruiting and retention of officers and support personnel has become a competition for scarce resources. Every municipality is looking for any competitive advantage they can get. For example, just last week, the council added emergency dispatchers and detention officers to the public safety category for retirement purposes in order to match the benefit offered by surrounding communities. In this environment, we have to think of our police headquarters through the lens of competitive recruitment. The average police station in our area was built or renovated in 2015 compared to ours that was built in '73. These facilities have had an average investment of $21.7 million, while we've invested in patchwork repairs. These facilities average 76,000 square feet compared to ours at 61,000 square feet. And that factor is complicated by the fact that these facilities have an average of 103 sworn personnel working there compared to 230 sworn personnel in our facility. It bears repeating. Our police facility is unsafe, inefficient, and harmful to recruiting. Now, as my kids like to say, says who? Well, in 2018, the Downtown Redevelopment Coordinating Committee report, which recommended projects that were intended to spur economic growth, remove blight, promote tourism, and attract private investment, recommended that the city incorporate a new justice center into its overall plan of finance. The 2018 Police Master Plan recommended building a new facility to accommodate the needs for growth for the next 100 years. And in April of 2023, 68.5% of Independence voters approved the imposition of a 3% sales tax on recreational marijuana for public safety purposes, specifically to serve as core funding toward a new justice center. Now, I've had the opportunity to work with 4 different police chiefs in Independence, all of whom who wanted to find a solution to get the men and women of the IPD into a building that is safe, clean, and becoming of their status. There have been a number of ideas explored and efforts made to address this issue. In 2017 and 18, the city explored forming a community improvement district for a new justice center that would have generally been located around 291 and 23rd Street. That effort stalled for a variety of reasons, not the least of which was some resistance to the CID because the geographic boundaries that were required to provide adequate revenue to fund the construction would have stretched from 24 Highway all the way down to I-70 and Lee Summit Road. It turns out that a CID that looks like a baby seahorse draws some furrowed eyebrows. But the purchase of the hospital campus still presented intriguing opportunities to co-locate our police facilities in a centralized location. But at the time the property was acquired, the decision was made, as I understand it, to construct the Independence Utility Center here because the utilities at that time had a large cash reserve and could fund the acquisition of the property and the renovation of the building. And that was important because it addressed a blighted property in a highly visible area of our city, took care of a major need. Now, funding does exist to solve building needs for our fire department. As I've mentioned before, this is something we should all feel good about, thanks to the passage of the fire safety sales tax increase a few years ago. These new funds are going to allow us to construct, renovate, or remodel several of our stations, and currently 3, which are just now included in our capital improvements plan. However, no sufficient funding exists to solve the building needs of our police department. And as I expressed back on January 9th when we were talking about the marijuana sales tax, that funding would help us take steps toward addressing our police facility, but would not serve as a final solution. That challenge has only been intensified by the inflationary economy that we've all endured. When that tax was approved back in April, the immediate priority was designing a justice center to replace the current headquarters. Unfortunately, costs have now tripled. The costs reflected on this screen, as I've mentioned before, are based on figures from 2 projects currently under construction, justice centers in both Grain Valley and Lenexa. If we were to pursue this plan, that would mean using 1/3 of the city's maximum debt levy on just this project. And knowing the $1 billion of deferred maintenance we have throughout the city, we felt like going all in with 1/3 of our debt capacity here wasn't the most prudent use of our financial resources. So we went back to the drawing board and rethought our approach. We are serious about pursuing this plan thoughtfully, but with a sense of urgency. Last month, we issued an RFQ for a space needs assessment and concept planning services for the new Justice Center. That RFQ sought qualified firms to update the current master plan and space needs assessment and provide site and concept planning services. This will be a critical step to defining the needs to be addressed by a new Justice Center, and staff are currently in the process of evaluating 6 proposals. So I think I've outlined for you we have a problem, but we also have a reasonable solution. After months of research and outside-the-box thinking, we've developed what we believe to be an innovative solution to address our most urgent facility needs in a financially responsible manner, while also preparing downtown for a transformational redevelopment project here in Western Independence. The plan involves a 3-step process and is illustrated on this map. Here's how it works. First, lease purchase the GEHA landmark building located in Southeast Independence. Then relocate the city-owned utilities from the Independence Utility Center to the GEHA landmark building. Next, relocate the administrative offices out of the current Independence Police Headquarters into the utility center. Knowing that our police need an immediate solution, we move them to the building, and this takes 45,000 square feet of need off the table towards our ultimate solution, meaning we can address our police facility construction needs for 1/3 of the price. The police get to move into an award-winning building that's only now 7 years old, and we build out the remaining facility needs on the vacant land at that site. And the police have a consolidated campus in the geographic center of our city. I've been asked if we considered any other options that would facilitate this transfer of our utility employees. We did. Staff evaluated alternative options. We feel confident that this represents the most financially responsible and operationally practical solution. As illustrated here, we're estimating the renovation cost and acquisition of GEHA along with the police headquarters needs at about $70 million, using a currently available commercial building that's on the market. And in fairness to those folks, we won't mention which one that specifically is, but that renovation cost coupled with the police headquarters is closer to $111 million, so about a $40 million difference. Now, there are several benefits associated with this plan. It frees up $78 million in police facility needs, which allows us to address other community priorities like the long-awaited community recreation center. It consolidates public safety on one campus with police, dispatch, and court. It takes a modern economic development approach to downtown redevelopment, which sparks additional redevelopment across Western Independence. It consolidates facilities to improve customer service. It consolidates other operations, which helps us save on our operating and maintenance costs, and it helps address employee recruitment and retention, particularly in the police department. Now, between Independence Police Department and our City Hall, and I'm using this just as some indicative operating costs, those two, the city spends nearly $300,000 annually on operating costs because of those inefficient facilities. That does not include the large backlog of deferred maintenance needs. Now, utility costs at the GEHA building are $80,000 less than City Hall and the police department headquarters combined. We're focused on addressing the police department headquarters, but I include that to say these buildings that are older and less efficient do have a financial price tag associated with them. Staying status quo has a cost associated with it. Or put another way, we can use the funds towards debt service and operating costs on a building that is worth maintaining over the long term, which is a more effective use of public funds.
Before you get any further, can you go back 3 slides
1, 2, 3.
and just walk through that math one more time, please?
Sure. So focusing just on the renovation costs so the acquisition cost, the $20 million issuance, That does not include the interest price, but that's the $20 million acquisition cost. Then, for round numbers' sake, we're assuming construction of the remaining police justice center campus would be $50 million for a round number total of $70 million. If you throw in the associated interest, if we borrowed the full $20 million, that takes that number to $82 million, just for everybody's quick math.
And that does not include the purchase of the IRC or the land.
No, that does not, correct. Want to make sure we're clear on that. That,
Please proceed.
If you don't mind that we
sure, no,
go through some of these numbers and slides as you go through.
Yeah.
So the $50,000 number, $50 million number that we're looking at, how close are we to that number, would you guess, not having, exact designs, layouts, build-out documents that, how close do you think we are to that?
I don't think we're, ready to issue a contract today, but we've arrived at that number using the 2018 master plan and talking about, what we would need at full build-out, the total square footage, subtracting the square footage of the Independence Utility Center from that total number, taking that leftover square footage that we know we need to have a consolidated justice center campus and multiplying it by the costs that we've been quoted for construction from Grain Valley and Lenexa. So certainly the way they're designing their buildings could impact that cost. The current market economics could be impacting that cost. Going through this Justice Center space analysis exercise will help us figure out what we need and how to build that for our police personnel. But it's not just a WAG either. We've based it on some real math.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Sure, okay. And again, please feel comfortable to jump in as needed. It's important. One of the questions that I've been asked, are we taking a Class A office building off of the market? And if this was any year before 2020, I would tend to agree with that concern. However, local commercial real estate brokers have stated that there are over 2 million square feet of sublease space on the market in Kansas City, and the national market reflects that trend. There has been a total negative net absorption of 21.3 million square feet through the fourth quarter of 22 and the first quarter of 23, bringing the national vacancy rate in office to 17.8%, the highest level since the second quarter of 1993. Average occupancy across the 10 largest metropolitan markets in the United States remains at only 49.9%. And so as a result, while office using employment has risen to 5.5% above the pre-pandemic levels, occupied office space is still at 3.5% below pre-pandemic levels. So as the National Association for Industrial and Office Parks has concluded, buildings, until these buildings are retrofitted, repurposed, or demolished, a surplus of obsolete space will likely pose a headwind for the broader office market. I'm going to transition now to speaking to some of these buildings specifically, and just making sure we're all operating from the same common picture. Thought we'd talk about what is this GEHA landmark building. That building is located at 20201 and 20221 East Jackson Drive in the southeast corner of the city, right at the corner of Little Blue Parkway and I-70. That's commonly referred to as the GEHA building because it was previously occupied by that organization. And I do want to be clear, that is not the building that's on US 24 Highway, which GEHA also previously occupied. So the building is 95,527 square feet. It was built in 2001 and then renovated in 2020. This property has been on the market since March of 23, so 278 days to tonight. That's according to the real estate listing. The listed asking price is $10.5 million, or about $109 a square foot. The city negotiated a purchase price of approximately $9.15 million, or $95.78 a square foot. The building, back in 2004, was sold for a purchase price of $18.7 million, which equated to $195 a square foot. At that time, that was one of the highest prices ever achieved in the Kansas City area. By comparison, back in 2004, average prices were going for $150 a square foot. So by any standard, the $95.78 a square foot is a good deal. How would the city pay for the building? The council is considering the 20-year lease purchase, which includes acquiring the building, acquiring the property, and refurbishing the building. The $20 million would be borrowed and carry a 5.18% interest rate for a 20-year term. The projected annual debt service would be $1.6 million. The payment schedule that I'm referring to, again, is included on the ordinance agenda item on the city's website. Terms allow for early prepayment starting in December of 2030, and the city could return up to $2 million of unused funds without any prepayment penalty. The money is being borrowed from Webster Bank. Webster Bank is a national bank with no local ties or affiliations. Webster Bank is the 40th largest bank in the U.S. as of September 2022, and it is a regional bank primarily located in Massachusetts and New York. They significantly exceed the Federal Reserve's definition of well-capitalized and are among the Fed's top 15% of mid-sized banks in the United States. So how would the city make lease payments? Well, a couple different ways. The city-owned utilities would make rental payments to the city based on square footage the city utilities occupy in the building. The city could cover the remaining balance from the city's general fund, particularly as savings from costly emergency repairs at IPD headquarters are eliminated. Potential revenue-generating opportunities also exist for the city. Our real estate broker in this transaction estimates we could sell the accompanying pad site that's coming with this deal for approximately $1.3 million, and that the lease of unoccupied space could generate an additional $700,000 to $800,000 annually. Now, of course, that is what the city could demand, but of course, you got to find somebody who would pay that. So I want to be clear that that's not a guarantee at all. In all likelihood, it is a combination of these options that will be used to cover the lease payments. Utility funds, general fund, and lease revenue from unused space in the building. So here is a look at indicative debt service allocations by fund. And again, we have to determine the final space allocation within the building, but based on what we believe allocation within the building would look like, water would be responsible for 20%, IPL 12%, sewer 8.7%, the city's internal services fund 26%, and the general fund at 33%. The dollar amounts are on there as well, so for a total amount of $1.6 million annually in debt service. Now, the utilities are paying some measure of debt already today on the building they're in, and so here is a comparison of the current debt or rent, whatever the case may be, at the utility center, and then what they would pay at GEHA under that indicative pricing I just showed. Water is a larger amount than they're currently paying because they oversee the utility customer service function. They're going to command a large footprint in that building, so that is why you see a larger amount increase for water. But you can actually see we anticipate Power and Light having a reduction in its overall annual debt payment of about $139,000.
And Mr. Walker, this does not include operating costs for the existing building. You showed those as a net benefit to the IUC.
This
Thank you.
is
Okay.
the debt service on the bonds for power and light, and then the rent amounts that water and sewer pay to the electric utility for the space they occupy. And I want to specifically zone in on power and light because I know it is our largest utility. It is the one we are all most familiar with when it comes to our utility bills, et cetera. So I think it's really important to give it some additional time under the microscope here. In 2016, $5.22 million in IPL bond proceeds were used to finance the renovation of the utility center. And that does include both the issuance costs and then the reserve fund to pay debt service. Those 2016 series bonds are 30-year bonds. The current annual debt service is approximately $330,000 annual debt service on those. Over the 30-year life of the bonds, that means debt service will be about $9.9 million. Under this proposed scenario, IPL's annual debt service would be reduced by $138,000 and generate a lifetime savings to the electric utility of just over $6 million. So I want to make sure I say that again and I'm clear. This transaction saves IPL money on debt service. If approved, once the purchase of the IUC closes, proceeds from that sale could then be used to prepay the portion of the 2016 series bonds on or after June 1, 2026. And we do have our bond counsel here tonight, so if you have more specific questions about the defeasance of those bonds, I might encourage you to wait till we're done with that and ask him to come forward then. How soon could the building be ready? The timetables and the move-in schedules are still being developed, but we hope to have it completed as soon as possible to mitigate against the additional inflationary pressures as well as to expedite the occupancy of IPD at that new site. Will the funds that we borrow actually be spent on this building? Many community members and stakeholders obviously want to ensure that this money will go for its intended use and not be used for willy-nilly pet projects. So let me tell you how this works. The $20 million would be held in a special trust fund at UMB Bank and only available to the city upon certain terms and conditions. Funds would be provided based on invoices submitted for work completed, and that is reflected in the escrow agreement that can be, again, found online on the agenda item associated with this ordinance. So in short, the $20 million can only be spent on GEHA or the landmark building, whatever we call it, and on no other city buildings or projects unless the bank and the city council gave us permission to do so. Who do we see moving into this building? Well, obviously all of the city departments currently located at the utility center would be relocated into the renovated GEHA building. We would also consider relocating other city services into the building. For example, and I want to be clear about this, we are currently evaluating relaunching our tourism department, which has been a function of our Parks and Recreation department. Maybe it makes sense for that space. That would need to be evaluated, and that's only indicative of the ideas that exist. What we know for certain is that the GEHA landmark building would not be fully occupied, and the city could lease space to another tenant, whether that's itself or a private user in the building if we choose to do so.
Please proceed.
Mr. City Manager, can you go over who is at the IUC now?
Yeah. The electric utility has a lot of administrative and professional services type employees there. So most of our frontline employees are linemen and their support services, office out of the Blue Valley Power Plant out on Truman Road. Professional positions like the director, the deputy director, the engineers, and some of those support staff office out of the IUC building. We have our water department, except for our field services operations, which are at the other end of Truman Road, on the western end of the city. All the water department employees, which are now part of municipal services, are there. All sewer employees that are part of municipal services are there. Stormwater employees are there. And then a lot of our, what used to be Public Works but is in this municipal services department are located there, again, except for frontline workers like our street maintenance employees who office out of the Chrysler Central Garage facility.
So to follow up with that, and you don't have to go back to the slide, but when we're talking about general revenue funds, the $500,000 that we were looking, what departments are you anticipating would help cover that dollar amount?
Not necessarily a functional department, but that is the gap that has to be covered because of the lack of space in that, or lack of utilization of that building right now. So I show that as the general fund because that is what, other funds have restrictions on how you use those. The intended purpose, the general fund has far fewer restrictions on it. So that is where that difference will need to come from unless we find another user, like a private user or another non-general fund revenue function that can occupy that space and make up that difference for us.
So that's an unidentified gap right now?
Correct.
Okay.
That amount associated with the general fund represents the unused portion of the building right now.
Thank you.
Okay. Now I'm going to transition to focus a little bit more on the Independence Utility Center. And again, making sure we're all speaking about the same facility. This building is the 47,800 square foot facility that's located at 17221 East 23rd Street, at 23rd Street and 291 in Independence. That is a renovated medical office building located on the former campus of the Medical Center of Independence. The building renovation was completed in October of 2016. And again, as I just said to Councilmember Perkins, that houses administrative and customer services for Power and Light, along with offices for municipal services and some large training spaces. The city initially acquired that 14-acre hospital campus in 2013. And Independence Power and Light paid $14.9 million toward acquisition, construction, demolition, all-in costs of $14.9 million. Now, a little bit about this building once it was remodeled. The U.S. Green Building Council awarded the facility the highly coveted Leadership in Energy and Environmental Design, or LEED, Platinum certification. That is the highest designation for exceptional energy and water conservation, site connectivity, sustainable construction techniques, and then a number of indoor health, safety, and user comfort features. Basically, it's the antithesis of the police headquarters. The project was also recognized by the Kansas City Business Journal as a winner of a capstone award in the green design category. So, in short, this is an exceptional building. It may be too subjective to call the building new, but to say that it is old or that the IPD personnel would be inhabiting a hand-me-down facility, I personally believe would be grossly erroneous. Most of that space in the utility center, as I've said, is administrative or training space in nature. So there are no utility control systems specific to that site. That means utilities have to be in that building. Will IPL be repaid for the property and the building? Yes. The city would have to determine a fair market price for the property and the Independence Utility Center building and repay the utility if that building does become used for police-related functions. The city will evaluate the funding capacity in the marijuana sales tax fund, the general fund, and the police public safety sales tax fund to establish a reimbursement plan for the IUC building and the land. And I do want to recall for everybody that there is an example of this. The city reimbursed IPL for the land where a new 6,000 square foot emergency response call center for police and fire was constructed. The cost of the comm center was $3.2 million. The building and the parking lot required just over an acre of land for the project, and since the city acquired the property using power and light funds, as part of this project, $59,687.68 was transferred to the Power and Light Fund for this property. And then that building opened in 2018. How will the upfront police costs be financed? There would be some costs associated with relocating portions of Independence Police Department into the Independence Utility Center once it's vacated. There are no current estimates of these costs, but you'll recall all of that is being addressed in the space needs analysis that hasn't yet started. Some furniture, fixtures, and equipment purchases may be necessary, and I would certainly say retrofitting will be necessary to make some public safety specific functions inhabitable in that building. There are also several options for funding, including, again, the general fund, the marijuana sales tax fund, and the police department's capital improvements fund to address those needs. Does this solve the need for IPD permanently? No, but it would be a start. The most recent planning document, which was completed in May of 2019 by the firm Helix, projected a new police center would need 145,000 square feet at full build-out to accommodate future growth and expansion. The Independence Utility Center is 47,800 square feet, about a third of the total space specified in the study. That means 2/3 of the IPD facilities will consist of new construction. Several current functions would need to remain at the current police headquarters, including the jail, until the final design and construction activities are completed. But ultimately, this will consolidate all IPD functions into one place instead of the current model in which IPD operates out of 7 different facilities across the city. So what's the plan for the rest of the IPD facilities? The city's discussing putting the general obligation bond on the April 2025 ballot. This would require voter approval and involve a property tax increase. The current plan allocates $50 million for public buildings, including $42 million specifically for police functions. The city is close to selecting an architectural firm to help with our master planning. And once that study is completed, we'll sharpen our understanding of how much additional space is needed to properly meet the needs of our police department and provide them with newly constructed, modernized, safe, spacious sanitary work conditions. There is sufficient ground, we do know, at the Independence Utility Center to add the additional police building and the spaces needed. The Public Safety Communication Center is already there. Okay, everybody's favorite question. What if the general obligation bond fails? And we all want an answer to that question. So first, consider that this transaction, as part of that, major portions of the police department's administrative functions and staff would be located into a new modern building. Part of the police headquarters would need to be addressed, but not entirely. About a third of our problem would be solved with this transaction. In my opinion, a general obligation bond remains our recommended financing tool to address our deferred maintenance backlog. That is because it typically presents the lowest possible interest rates for financing projects. If the bond were to be defeated, it would be my recommendation to revisit that issue as soon as possible, and perhaps in a manner that addresses just the police needs. That, of course, would need more discussion and would ultimately be a decision of the city councils. We could also work with our financial advisors and our bond counsel to develop a strategy that uses existing resources to bond for new construction in a piecemeal manner, though that would certainly be more expensive over time. We also would certainly evaluate alternative financing mechanisms as well. But I think this question, while meritorious, isn't the only question we should be asking. I think we should also be asking what happens if we don't approve this plan in front of you. And I think that question is far easier to answer. As I've pointed out in other forums, we've made great progress in countless areas, and tonight is certainly not the night to rehash those achievements. But we also need to be realistic about our circumstances. Since 2020, the U.S. Census Bureau estimates that Independence has the third highest population loss among cities in Missouri, behind only St. Louis and St. Joseph. While we all need to have a sense of urgency about getting started on building a better Independence for tomorrow, I came across this quote from William Bradford speaking about the founding of the Plymouth colony, and he said that all great and honorable actions are accompanied with great difficulties, and both must be enterprised and overcome with answerable courage. Does this plan involve risk? Sure. But I, as your manager, have weighed that risk, and I believe that inaction is a far riskier proposition. What comes next? Well, we need to do several important things and make sure they are done right. Tuesday night, the council will have a chance to vote on the financing of the Geehaw Landmark building. From there, the city would renovate the space to be occupied by the utilities and, again, perhaps other city or private functions. We would engage a real estate service to market unused portions of the building and the site to those non-city enterprises. And finally, we need to complete the Justice Center Space Master Plan to ensure we build a police department that meets the needs of our community and our department. So, Mr. Mayor and members of the council, I conclude my presentation. I am available for questions. Our bond counsel is here. Our financial advisor is appearing by Zoom tonight, and then the police chief is here as well. So we tried to think of everybody you might have questions for, and we are ready to stand for those questions.
Thank you, Mr. Walker. Very well done. Answered a lot of my questions. City Council, any further questions?
Mr. Mayor,
Please proceed.
Mr. City Manager, can you kind of explain why is it called a lease-purchase agreement, not just like a purchase agreement, or is there a difference?
Yeah, so this is where I'm going to let the financial folks come up and make sure I don't misspeak on anything.
David Martin with Gilmore and Bell. I serve as bond counsel to the city. So the lease purchase designation, it reflects that you're not only paying lease payments that make up the debt service during the term of the lease, but that you have an option to prepay and purchase under certain time constraints. And then ultimately, at the end of the transaction, you do purchase for just $1 the property. So the purchase part is meant to represent that buyout provision and put the, if the reader basically on notice that at the end of the transaction, this property is going to end up back in the hands of the city with no outgoing lease. So it's always owned in fee by the city after the initial purchase from your seller. And then it's leased out for a long period, in this case for 40 years. And then the lease purchase is the document where the city leases back, so takes back possession with the option to cancel both leases and effectively purchase it back and clear the leases off the title.
So at some point, could the city actually just, I'm not saying we would, but a council, could we just say, oh, we're not going to do it anymore and just pull out of the lease?
Yes. So in order for this to not be an unconstitutional debt, because it didn't go in front of the populace for a vote, it has to be annual appropriation as the pledge. So you're not allowed to enter into just a traditional corporate loan agreement that says we, the city, are going to pay you back X dollars a year for 20 years. Each of those years has to be subject to annual appropriation. So in any of those years, the city can say, we have decided this was a bad idea, we're not going to continue to appropriate, and the result of that is you lose possession of that property then for the term of that longer base lease. So if 5 years down the road, the city non-appropriates, the city loses possession for that remainder of the 35-year term.
Okay, so once this would go into effect, who has title to the property?
The city will retain fee title to the property.
So the title would be in the city's name?
Correct.
Is that correct? So
Correct.
there would be no yearly taxes paid because it's a city
Correct.
property.
It'll be treated the same as any other municipal property.
Okay. And then, Mr. City Manager, what's the current value of the IUC? Do you know that?
No, we need to complete a fair market analysis of that building and the land. When we purchased and built and all of that in 14, that was $14.9 million, but that was all in, construction cost, demolition of the old hospital, all of that. We would need to come in and get the appraisal on the building and the remaining land minus the communication center the land was already paid for.
Okay. And you mentioned, was it 2004 that they sold for 18 million?
Yeah, 2004, it sold for 18.7 million.
And was that Geehaw that bought that at that point, or do you know?
No, that was another private firm, and I believe they were an out-of-state company.
Okay. All right. I think that's all I have for now. Thank you.
Please proceed.
Mr. Martin, should wonderful things happen and the Fed begins to reduce interest rates and we reach the point where they are lower than they are now, would we be able to refinance this debt?
So that was mentioned a little bit or discussed a little bit at the last meeting. There is a call provision in this lease purchase agreement, and this goes back to the idea that a lease purchase agreement is an investment that sort of mirrors what happens in the traditional municipal bond market. And so they have a lot of provisions that mirror what you would see in a bond. And one of those provisions is what we call call protection. So the investor wants to know that you're not going to run out and refinance immediately, and then they lose the value of that investment and have to find a different investment to park those funds. So in order to protect against that risk, they typically have a period of call protection where you're not allowed to refinance. So in this circumstance, that was dealt with by use of a premium and a period of call protection that runs until 2030. And so at that point, you can refinance, but you have to pay a 2% premium. And then over 3 years, it trickles down to 0 premium. So it's what we call a descending premium call protection provision. So there is a period in which you would not be able to refinance, but after that you would be.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Several other questions.
Absolutely. I didn't mean to interrupt. Please forgive me.
Just while you were up there, I was like.
No, Mr. Mayor,
Please proceed.
Mr. Martin, so does that mean we could buy out that call provision anytime prior to that?
So the call provision is what prevents the buyout. So in a lease purchase circumstance, what you're referring to as the buyout, essentially purchasing the property out of the lease, that coincides with the call protection. In
So
a
is there-
traditional municipal bond where you didn't have that security, it would just be the call protection for the early prepayment of the bonds.
Is there a separate buyout provision then for early buyout or?
No, that is the early buyout
That's what I
provision.
thought, okay,
Right.
right. But skipping back to the IUC bonds that we have from 2016.
16.
Can you give me just a brief rundown on those?
Sure. So that transaction was used to fund the building that we're talking about, moving some of the functions from. I have some notes on that transaction. So it was issued and is currently outstanding in the amount of $47,180,000. The debt service on that, the principal portion, was deferred and doesn't start until June 1, 2038. Presumably, I wasn't on that transaction. I wasn't primary for the city at the time, but the reason for that would have been to wrap the debt service around other debt service that IPL was paying because there were other deals outstanding at that time. It is callable on June 1, 2026. A portion of those funds that we have estimated, we didn't have time to do a full records analysis on that, but in a portion of those funds, and about $4.8 million were used to purchase and or improve that building. So In order to, and that wasn't a lease purchase that burdened that particular building, but that building was subject to it as it was financed in part with tax-exempt bond proceeds. So the rules that relate to all tax-exempt issuances in terms of public use and so forth do apply to that building. So there will be some restrictions if the city decides to lease or sell that building to a non-governmental entity. It has to be state or local government. Federal government doesn't count for the tax rules. That would create private use of that building, and so there would have to be a remedial measure taken if that were the case.
If we simply use it for another department or sell it internally to our police department or sell it to another city department, would that affect those bonds?
As long as it is a governmental use and it stays within the city, it would have no effect on those outstanding bonds. So you could move police, fire, whatever other department, and there could be an agreement to pay rent between the different city departments, and none of that matters from a tax-exempt perspective.
Wonderful. Okay. Thank you.
Any further questions? Please proceed.
Mr. City Manager, I just want to be sure that I understand all of this. The water department, municipal services with sewer, et cetera, they are already paying rent.
They are.
Okay.
Those functions are paying rent to the electric utility.
Okay, so it doesn't increase costs. There's a small increased cost to the water department because they're the billing entity.
They are.
When they move to the, if they were to move to the
If they were to
GEHA.
move there, yes,
Okay.
ma'am, correct.
Whenever you buy an old building, you have lots of questions. I would imagine that you have spent some time looking at the structural integrity of the IUC, because that used to be an old medical building, and the structural integrity of the landmark building. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, I'll start with the landmark building, and I think the issues there can really be summarized into 4 key things. Some of them cosmetic, some of them structural. The structural issue is really the roof. The building needs a new roof. We've had the building looked out just like you buy a home and you get an assessment of that. We've done the same with this property, and a new roof is necessary. That is part of the cost of the $20 million that we're planning for. Because of the functions we will house here, we need a backup generator. So if power goes down, we have redundant service, and we don't compromise our servers or anything else like that that's housed on site. Along those same lines, because we are a governmental entity, we need our own separate fiber optic network, so the installation of that. And then I would say the cosmetic piece of that is where we envision housing utility customer service on the ground floor, accessible to the public. Some remodeling is necessary in order to make that functional for that specific kind of use. So that area of the building was built more, I would say, as an employee gathering space, and we need to build it to have more of that customer service interaction function there. So that's really with the GEHA. With the utility center building, we are fortunate with our utilities that we do a good job of having good cash flow, adequate reserves, et cetera. That has allowed us to do upkeep and maintenance on the building as we've gone along. So whereas the police station and some of these other general funded entities, we have neglected those and have made those costly emergency repairs, we are doing a pay-as-you-go maintenance on those utility center buildings. So it is in remarkably good shape. Not really any significant repairs that need to be made. The investment there is more the modifications to make the building, even though administrative police functions will be there, there are still some security enhancements that must be done to make the building function in a secure manner for the police department.
When I was out knocking doors, it was amazing how many people talked about their frustration with buildings that, don't have any occupants in them. And so I'm delighted with the idea of reuse of a building that's currently vacant. But I have to ask you, did you look at other buildings? Were there other sites that made sense? Did you evaluate that in a different way?
We did. I showed you one in the presentation tonight, and again, out of fairness to that owner, I won't specify that exact property, but it is a large commercial office space in Independence. The condition of it was such that it was going to need significant repairs to make that functional, and also to rebuild it in such a way that it would function. We actually looked at that building both through the lens of utilities, but also police, to see if it would help function and serve to address our police needs. We've also looked at some even temporary solutions, maybe smaller spaces where functions are broke up across, but what we lose there is the economies of scale of you're paying, either down payments or leases or rents on multiple buildings, or building maintenance if you own the facility, and you lose the operating efficiencies of having all these departments together. I can tell you, having municipal services function as three departments that have, cross-pollination among their issues, we're realizing tremendous economies of scale with that right now. And, some of the frustrations of, why did you put a water line down and then cut the street? Well, because that's one department now, we're able to avoid some of those costly issues. So this really presented to us the most affordable purchase price of a building in remarkably good quality, even though it's 20 plus years old, it's been well kept, without losing those operating efficiencies that are making our departments perform at a higher level now.
When you talked about consolidating into a public safety campus, I know we've got K-9 units somewhere, we have like our special ops somewhere else. We have a couple of satellite in-community police stations. What are you anticipating? All of those will move to the central campus, or you'll still, I'm thinking of the Independence Center has a police outstation, Englewood has a police outstation. What do you anticipate?
I think those substations serve a strategic purpose. So the one in Englewood, the mall, and then Hawthorne Place Apartments, those were placed there for very strategic, purposeful reasons to help address issues in those particular communities. And I think those have had the intended result and outcome. So I think we would be short-sighted to, and in a lot of those examples, those spaces are being provided gratis to the city or at a greatly reduced cost. So we're not really out money from occupying those spaces per se. What I, in a perfect world, would envision would be our police administration, our police, locker room for patrol, all of the specialized units, the K-9 kennel, the firing range, some service stations, bays, because police have some specific work they do, like mounting of the equipment in the cars, et cetera, so having work bays for them right now, and then the jail and municipal court, because we have obviously the safety issues of transporting people across the way here right now. A lot of that is going to be dependent on the space study and what comes back with cost, and then making a policy decision about how much of our bond do we want to allocate it. But that is my preferred outcome and hope. And I know in talking to the chief, from a tactical operational standpoint, having all those functions in one place, just as I mentioned with municipal services, those same operating efficiencies exist by consolidating police all in one campus.
So will we not actually be making some of our problems worse, because in the next 5 years, you're going to have your administrative police functions separate from some of your on-the-street functions until you can get everybody back in one spot? And maybe you just say that's the cost of doing business, because we have got to make a decision about this at some point. But have you thought through kind of the mechanics of that split life for those years?
I could certainly speak to that, but I think it's important for the council and the community to hear from the chief on this.
Good evening, Mayor and council members. Adam Dustman, Chief of Police, and Councilmember McCandless, to your point, yes, we've considered that. What the city manager is talking about, our administrative functions, are all, with the exception of our detention facility, the jail that is there, could move out there. So again, I'm not an engineer. I'm highly anticipating this conceptual assessment to be completed, and they can go through the exercise of Tetris of how everything fits in there. But just preliminarily, having walked through the IUC, the third floor, as it is now administratively, would be our administrative floor as it is housed. Our investigative floor, which is where we do all of our investigative elements within the police building across the street, could be housed on the second floor with almost relatively little to no expense. I mean, they are all administrative functions when you think about interviewing and office work and case preparation. Downstairs on the first floor of the IUC, we have what we have now is you all are familiar with the IUC 117, which mirrors kind of our multi-purpose room. So a training, multi-purpose level facility to be able to conduct various functions for the police department and community needs. We house our Citizens Academy in there, various ceremonial aspects, all could be done out there. On the other side, where you have the payment center that is currently located, again, subject to the experts in their Tetris game, I envision that being what is now housed as our records unit. So again, with some retrofitting for security, that would naturally house itself with some office behind, which is exactly the same setup we have there. So in essence, you have everything with the exception of the detention facility itself that is housed across the street would move there. We would account for property and evidence, which is currently in the basement opposite the jail. It's possible that we could use, because of the security measures that are in place, we could use a longer term storage here still while we had the shell of the building here until the jail would be constructed. That would give us some availability there, but actually move the core functions to the new facility. So that takes care of that piece. Patrol, much to several people's surprise until they come through the Citizens Academy, actually operates within the smallest footprint of our facility. So they need a room to brief in, which could be 117. It could be somewhere else in the facility that I'm not intimately familiar with at this point that we could designate. But then they go out, and then they are in their cars, their offices, their vehicle. They meet up with their supervisors and command staff in the field. That won't change. So all of those economies are realized almost immediately. The only thing that we would need to make sure that we are sensitive to, and we have had discussions on, is for our detention personnel. Again, no different than now. Everybody leaves the building, they go to work, especially overnights, and our detention facility is secure and has redundant security measures that I won't discuss, obviously, but they're there and secure with a response element that comes in if needed. No different. We still have people that will be assigned to this geographical area here that would provide that response element should it be needed. I just want to make sure that we're sensitive to those folks that are here to make sure that we are on top of their needs, that they would be located still here until we could provide a facility that would be adequate for them.
And will you have enough parking?
So we have that's going to be we have some off-site locations now that we have stored some vehicles in. We are going to have to kind of play that game again, kind of the shell game. What we will do is no different than the jail. We'll still utilize, until the city decides that they release or do something else with that property, should this all go forward, we still have access to that. So we can use right now police cars that are damaged or wrecked, that we have to hold for insurance purposes or repurposing of equipment. We can now are taking spots here, will free up just staff parking that is out there. So and again, you have the public facing parking lot that is there, which is really bigger than the allocated parking for the public that we have here. So that gives some spaces there. And then you have the behind the gate parking that is back behind that facility, which largely is equal to space-wise our parking lot now minus the overflow that I mentioned.
Fabulous. Thank you very much.
Anything else? Anyone else other further questions of the chief? Okay, thank you, chief. Okay, any other questions for Mr. Walker or the bond counsel or our financial advisor? Please proceed.
Mr. Walker, a few questions, but I think first I'm going to preface it with, I've been on the council for roughly 20 months now, and in that time, in fact, and before that time, you brought to the council's attention the needs to do something with the police station. So that discussion has been ongoing for a long time. And in fact, now, if I'm correct, we now have an engineer's report saying that that building is not repairable. Is that correct?
That is correct. Based on the structural issues with the facility, as well as the growth in the department, it is cost prohibitive, and frankly, throwing good money after bad to try to solve some of the structural issues at that site. So that is not their recommendation to try to rehabilitate or expand on that property.
Okay, all right. Well, that's helpful. I just wanted to talk about that, and also mention that I know that for the public, it may feel like this has come up quickly, but as you mentioned, we've been talking about it publicly for about 50 days. We talked about it as a council in executive session, which is for that purpose, so that we don't run into problems of inflated property values and things for quite some time prior to it being made public. So we have been working on this quite a while. So I just wanted to mention that. One question I have is, I did the calculation on the 1.6 million for 20 years. There's 32 million, and we're borrowing 20, so that's 12 million in debt service. The question that comes to mind on that is, why, or have you thought about, essentially borrowing from ourselves, from fund balances or something of that effect? I'm not suggesting that. I know that's been done in the past, and there's been criticism of that. So I understand that. I'm not suggesting that that's what we ought to do. But I just want to hear your thoughts about why we shouldn't do that.
Yeah, there's a couple of different reasons, and it's a fair question, and I'll be honest, I'm very proud of the fact that the amount of debt the city's paid down, the economic development projects we've been able to close because of our aggressive repayment of debt. One thing I would say is, in the case of municipal government and the case of municipal financing, debt is a very different thing than it is to us as private residents. Debt is a sign of health in a lot of ways. It is a sign of an organization and a city that's investing in itself. And if we're going to pursue a larger bond issue, this is an opportunity for us to signal to the bond markets about our ability to pay on debt, which we have some of that track record, but it's another opportunity to do that and show our financial responsibility and our financial health. I would also say, probably more importantly, though, while all of our funds are getting healthier, we're achieving greater financial stability with each passing fiscal year. Despite the looming issues out there, our year-to-year finances are becoming more and more stable. You never know what kind of issue is going to present itself, what kind of an emergency circumstance is going to come down the pipeline. When the COVID-19 pandemic was first declared, and we certainly didn't have the knowledge about that we do now, but at the time, there was a great deal of fear about what is this going to mean with all of these businesses closing, people not working. Does this mean that we're essentially going to see a complete tanking of the local and national economy? Fortunately, that didn't turn out to be the case, but it can certainly highlight these unforeseen circumstances that seem like the stuff of science fiction until they come to pass. So having adequate reserve funds, I think, is important for the city to deal with these unforeseen circumstances. And then the final piece of that, council member, that I would share is right now, the city has adopted a reserve policy for the general fund of 16%. To my knowledge, the city has never hit that mark. We are on track this year that if all things remain constant, our team is forecasting that we will finish at that mark this year, maybe even slightly above. But that is the bare minimum threshold. And because the general fund is going to have to put some skin in the game on this, I don't think having them draw down from those reserves that we've worked so hard to build up at this time is the responsible thing to do. So those reasons in totality, though certainly paying $12 million over 20 years isn't ideal, it gives us the liquidity to deal with those issues that may arise over the next 20 years that we just can't predict.
Okay, so you brought up the general fund, near and dear to my heart, as you know. And so I just did a little napkin math here. So we'd have an additional roughly $500,000 expense for the IUC building. We'd also have additional expense for both the purchase of wait a minute, let me back up.
Yeah.
We'd have additional 500-some thousand for purchase of the GIHA building.
Yeah.
Out of the general fund. Plus, we'd have additional, I think you said around 300 and something for purchase of the IUC building.
Right.
And the renovations and all there. So that's roughly 800 to 900,000, right? And so, my question really then becomes, in the general fund, what are we going to not do to be able to have, those, to purchase, make those expenses?
Well, one thing that I'll start by answering the what we won't do. One thing we won't be doing is spending the roughly $370,000 a year that we're spending on emergency repairs at the police station right now. Over the last 8 fiscal years, we've spent approximately $2.56 million total over those 8 years on emergency repairs at the police station. So not throwing that good money after bad there will create some annual liquidity to put towards this. I think your question highlights the critical importance of finding the other users or liquidating that pad site, whether those other users are a city function or whether those other users are a non-city entity. I think that's incumbent upon us to find something so that the general fund's not hanging out there for the next 20 years, throwing that money toward empty space.
Okay, all right, thank you. Let's see, I think, the other thing, though, that I think that, obviously we don't know, as you've said, we don't know if the GO bond will pass. There's no way to know that at this point. Nobody has a crystal ball on that one. We'll hope, and, hope that the voters see the logic in that. But basically what I hear you saying is that in the event that we don't, at least for some period of time, past that, then there's other ways to skin the cat. While they may not be ideal, there are other ways that we can both, find ways to do things. It may not be as good as the GO bond scenario, but it is doable.
There are other ways to climb the mountain, yeah. And like I said, they may not be the most advantageous or preferred, but they would arrive at the same conclusion nevertheless.
Okay, well, I think for now that all my questions between questions that other council members asked and what I asked, I think they're all checked off, at least at this point. So I do probably have some more, but that's
Very
what I
good.
got for now.
We'll look forward to that.
Thanks.
Anyone else, other further questions?
Mr. Mayor.
Please proceed.
Mr. City Manager, kind of following along with Councilman Fear's comments about the police building and the savings of the cost of doing emergency repairs. If administrative is going to be the only one that's going to be moving over, and that means we're going to still basically have a fully functional building, how do we have that savings while we still have patrol and the other aspects of the police department fully functional?
What I think we anticipate, and Chief, you can correct me if I'm wrong, we anticipate the detention unit being what's left there right now. So though we're saying administrative function, what we mean is all of the non-detention related functions. So we would have the detention unit is what would be left over.
Before we have a general obligation bond, we would have enough capacity to build out the IUC for full function?
No, not to build out, but the things that are located within, and Chief, come back up here to help me fill this in because you work in the thing every day. But the functions that are in that building right now, we believe, independent of that study, we can shoehorn the rest of those things in there right now. I'll let the Chief clean that up.
No, that's exactly correct, Councilman Perkins. So we would have, again, all the functionality that is currently in the police building across the street, minus the detention unit, which is actually a segregated portion. You go through the sally port, and so that's a walled off. So thus, the emergency repairs for the building could, in essence, be neglected because there would be no other use of that building. Patrol would go. The only other thing that again is self-sufficient at this current stage is the firing range, which is, while nice, and is not nearly big enough for our training needs of today and the Supreme Court precedent for reality-based training. But we can make do with that until between that and our co-location of the Sugar Creek Outdoor Range until such time that we can build a more robust and fully functional range. But everything else within that building will move out to the IUC at the time that it is fully functional. And I will tell you that, again, I don't think that will take significant expense. I may come back before you and eat those words, but I really just going through there, knowing how we operate, knowing how we function, and knowing, to the city manager's point, how the building has been maintained and how it was set up and designed conceptually to begin with, I don't think that there's going to be a lot of retrofitting, with the exception of that records, that front-facing customer service area that will need to happen. Additionally, we will immediately realize the teamwork aspect that has largely been missing from our communications center being detached out there, and those hardworking folks feeling like they're on an island. Those back and forth and operational needs will be realized immediately upon occupation.
So forgive me, I guess I'm having a hard time visualizing having a build out for locker rooms and showers and all those types of facilities.
It's my understanding that there already are locker rooms and showers out there, and Director Reynolds is confirming that.
Okay, for the many people that we're looking at?
Yeah, we have, well, I will tell you there is one female shower currently that is used, and 3 stalls for the males for our entire 300 and some odd employees. So if we can't occupy that with a couple showers that are out there, we're in bad shape.
Fair enough, thank you.
Mr. Mayor.
Please proceed.
Chief, I would guess that your plans at some point will include detention, municipal court, training facility, including shooting range, also classroom space maybe, conference center / maybe kitchen facility, something. Anyway, some version of all that.
Correct.
Probably a fully fleshed out locker room,
Correct.
showers,
and
male,
I think
female, and
absolutely
the whole build out for and more fleshed out patrol space and all that too.
Absolutely. And I don't
Special,
mean to interrupt.
special unit needs and all that. I would imagine.
Yeah, the special ops part, the
Yeah.
city manager talked about the vehicle bays. I mean, obviously, we're going to have to figure out what that looks like. But again, that has been done. If you look at Kansas City, Missouri, you look at what's going in Lenexa, there's a gymnasium that's in there, which promotes health and well-being, co-located with a locker room space that you could have off of there so that employees could come. We could host, I know there's significant interest in a PALS, a police athletics program for the community, for the kids. Again, there's all sorts of things, but I don't want to get out over our skis as far as, what that looks like space-wise, but it will work functionally. And again, I can't highlight enough how much this facility here has been neglected over the years as far as the vision of growth. So to think that there is a settling of some sort to go from what we are in currently to what will be this new space is just simply not accurate. The facilities are there, the infrastructure is there, which will be an improvement and a realized improvement. But yes, that is just the beginning stage. It will need to be built out on this campus-style facility, which will allow us to be able to really take our training and operations to the next level.
Scale of 1 to 10, what would you be going to, 1 being the lowest and 10 being the highest? What would you be going to? And
In
From
terms
and
of
to.
facility from?
Yeah.
Well, I would say your scale council member is not accurate. I think we're in a negative somewhere. If you could go into the cesspools of integers, I think we could probably find the negative side of where we currently are. Any facility where we go in and we don't have raw sewage coming down on our heads or unknown black particulates coming from the vents all over our workspaces, I think is a nice welcomed improvement. So at this point, just to save myself some room to grow, I'll say a 9.
yeah, okay.
And you also have the communications facility right across the parking lot there.
Correct. They will be linked, which will be nice for us to be able to walk over, not only from a relief standpoint for those folks, but also realizing appreciation of those folks and being able to support them and lift them up, giving them a relief space now currently where they could go and break from to have interaction with other human beings, is just overall important for their health and well-being, and us from an operational standpoint. Also, emergency operations, obviously consolidated in that facility is of paramount importance as we look to emergency management and the future of our city. So there is a whole host of things that are very exciting for opportunities for this location. In addition to being the geographic center of the city, it just makes sense.
Mr. Mayor?
Please proceed.
This question may be for the city manager. As we're discussing future plans, designs, build-outs, any possibilities, maybe revisit with the state about the regional crime lab that, we're moving forward, we're getting serious with this particular piece of property. We had some good success in 2016, 15, 16, where the governor just shot that idea down. Any chance to revisit?
I can tell you the need has not gone away. So we would love to be at the front of the line to have that conversation. We would welcome a regional crime lab to be housed in this facility or somewhere in this community. It's really pretty disheartening to know the amount of time that goes by right now before some of this evidence is processed, which means victims or friends and family of victims have to wait that long to get answers or resolution on their legal proceedings. So I can't certainly speak for the state, but that need has only grown since those actions back in 15 and 16.
Would there be a proper way for us to give you direction to maybe explore that?
I think you're going to have the resolution on Tuesday night approving a contractual agreement with a new lobbying firm, and I think knowing where the council stands on that, that's something we could certainly convey to them and ask them to start exploring on the city's behalf.
Perfect, thank you.
Anything else? Anyone else have further questions?
Mr. Mayor,
Please proceed.
Mr. Walker, our police station is now going to be 51. I don't know how old all our public works buildings are old. City Hall's 42-ish.
Yes, sir.
I appreciate that you're looking into this. I don't even really care about talking about alternatives to the GO bond because I think the people in Independence are ready for a little hope, and I think they'll pass it, frankly. I really do. I think everybody's ready for some positivity for once. I am. And I appreciate that. I'm glad you and your staff put this together. I'm glad you're pursuing it. I appreciate that the chief is behind it and ready to get out of his bucket and into a building. I'm sure Director Reynolds is maybe not excited to have just crammed 3 departments into one and then have to move maybe, but she'll do it. I know she will. So I guess I just wanted to tell you that. So I appreciate that very much. What are you prepared to tell all the folks that are gonna come to the table with you over the next 12 months and your staff and say, but we want that money for our wages, for our equipment, for our whatever it is that we're negotiating for?
I think and you can't attribute to any one thing, but one of the reasons we see the peer cities around us growing and in turn growing their tax base, which in turn means they're able to invest in their organization and their people more, is because they've invested in themselves and in their community. We have opted not to do that to this point, which has discouraged private investment, which has discouraged growth in the community. As I mentioned, we're going backwards right now at an alarming rate. And drawing this line in the sand and making this a turning point moment for our community, I see that as the way that we're able to do more of what you're speaking to continue to pay wages and benefits and other very important basic services. You've got to have money to be able to do that. And in order to have money, you have to be growing as a community and as a tax base. And I think we've been very strategic about what we're picking here because we believe these are the things that are going to attract private investment and growth into the community.
I think what you just said is why we got 6 bids to design the police campus.
Yes, and I certainly am excited to eventually share with the council what that looks like, but I'll say it's not just any body in their basement. These are international firms that have done projects that you will all be very familiar with across the globe. So there's a significant interest in Independence right now in the development community.
That, for those of you that are new to the council, that's new. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else other further questions? Mr. Walker, if I can engage you just a little bit more, and I
Absolutely,
appreciate your patience
sir.
and your
No,
kindness
and
on
same
this.
to you. Thank you.
I've heard you use the term when we've had these discussions privately about this as a transformational moment in the city. And this is really the first step of moving the Tetra squares in the right spots in order to make that happen. And, I applaud you for having the courage to do that, and I applaud this council for listening and saying, hey, how can we do this and can we make it work? Obviously being fair to the employees that are here and not taking raises away from them to make this happen, but also for our city to make people feel proud of the buildings that they're in. I think that's very, very important. So I really appreciate you doing that. To follow up on Councilmember Perkins' question, and if I can, Chief, if I could indulge you just in a moment. So to clarify in my mind, and I'm going to use an example of this. So this is the current police building over there. Here is the jail off to the side. So when they move everybody out of here, this basically will become a non-functional building. This is completely self-contained. They have restrooms, services, all of those things that employees can be there and be safe and all of that until we in fact make the move out there, given the, moving the Tetris boxes in that location.
That is correct.
Okay. I thought that was the answer, but please forgive me for making an absolute answer to that. Is that's what you were looking for? I wanted to visualize it.
Well, until you did that, I had no idea. No, thank you for that visualization.
There was no intent, my friend, to embarrass you in any way, shape, or form. I hope that did not come across that way. It was really a question of clarification for my sake. I still, yeah. And please forgive me. Councilmember Hobart's just looking away for using props. So, if you could, one of the things that you said, which was very important, was a healthy community invests in itself. I haven't asked this question before. I hope it's a fair question, but just, almost in the back of a napkin, like Councilmember Fear said earlier, could you compare our debt load of our city to Blue Springs and Lee Summit to get a sense of that? Because when I look at them, I see them as healthy cities. I see them with new curbs, new sidewalks, new overlays. I see them investing in their city, and that might be an unfair comparison too, because their tax base may have in fact grown quicker, and therefore they can do those comparisons. But would it be fair to have your finance team put together kind of a broad-based comparison so that we could have it? Because I think the point you made earlier was very important, and if we could visualize that, I think that'd be helpful.
I will certainly dig that back up. I can tell you tonight, for conversational purposes, our tax levy in this community is somewhere between 20 to 50 cents lower than any of our peer cities around us. So per $100 of assessed valuation, we are 20 to 50 cents lower than any of the other communities around us. Because, again, those communities have made the conscious choice to approve those debt issuances that have allowed them to make those quality of life investments and investments in basic services in their community. So it's not even comparable right now. We are a fraction of what those cities were.
Okay.
Are.
I appreciate that, and then just and if you want to talk about it further, we can.
No,
certainly delve into it further.
I'll send that information out to the council. We have that at the ready, so I'll send it so again you can visualize it. But just again for conversational purposes, that we are significantly behind.
Perfect. And if, for the sake of a discussion here, I know a number of people will ask the question: will there be any disruption, in public services or city services because of the moves and the transitions? And I guess a good example of this might be moving to the utility center. I didn't experience any service disruptions. I didn't hear of any. Would you see that being the kind of same Tetris move that you did then as now?
I think it will be remarkably efficient, the move itself, and I think the continued efficiencies that this council and this community will see from having services co-located and centralized. You're only going to realize improved service in the long run as well. But I don't see any disruption at all, sir.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else? Other further questions?
Mr. Mayor,
Please proceed.
just one more question, I
Sure.
promise. I just thought of it. I should have thought of it earlier. We just approved the plan, or some studies the council did to study if we saw IPL or not. Is that going to have any influence on these studies? I mean, could it skew them one way or another?
I don't see them skewing those studies at all. Again, the council approved the study by DKMT, one study to look at developing a business plan and an ownership model, and the other one looking at the cost-benefit analysis of selling the utilities. This would be independent of that. They are looking at the merits of what kind of value are you going to realize if, versus what kind of risks are you going to inherit from selling a utility versus if you're going to keep it. Here are the business plan, the model for making it a well-run machine, even more well-run machine, I should say. So I don't see those being having any kind of relationship or disruption on one another, but I appreciate that question.
Okay, thank you.
I'd actually thought about that as well, but your slide that showed that, you know, we're going to save money for IPL.
Right.
By moving to this facility.
Yes.
Kind of answered that question for me.
And I think, in fact, to your point, Council Member Fears, that will benefit both sides of that argument. Whether if we're continuing to operate it, we've got $6 million less debt. If we sell it, we've got $6 million less debt.
Anyone else? Other questions?
Mr. Mayor?
Please proceed.
This is not exactly on the topic for this evening, but it's a concern I've heard that I think we're going to need to address repeatedly, which is when we reach the point of pursuing a general obligation bond, there are strict requirements, there are state regulations, there are limitations and oversight from the state on how that money gets spent. And could you speak to that very briefly?
Absolutely. What we communicate to the voters, and if they approve it, we have to come to the council and say, and now we would like to issue $20 million of debt to fix the bridges, because that's what we said we were going to do. If we were to come in and say, and now we would like to take $20 million to build an aquatic center, that would not be an allowable use of those funds. The debt associated with these projects, bondholders are going to ensure that it goes for the intended use of what the bonds were approved for. So we are very restricted to what we say in our proposal to the voters.
And those are segregated dollars, they don't get mixed in with operating funds. And then if we cheat or change the purpose of those funds in some way that is illegal, that actually state agencies have the ability to sanction, investigate, penalize the city for that. Is that correct?
You're speaking truth on that.
Thank you.
Because if I'm correct, that's why the state has a state auditor,
That's
theirs.
a very core purpose of that office, yes, sir.
right?
Mhm.
I mean, that's why they're there.
Yep.
To make sure that the cities and the counties follow their functions. So that's a very, very good point. Thank you. Anyone else, other further discussions? Any closing arguments you'd like to make on your behalf?
No, I appreciate, again, the indulgence on a short notice, and thank you for the very thoughtful questions from the council and the community.
Okay. Thank you. With that, we'll call this meeting adjourned. Thank you. Unless you had another